I am very excited today to share some tips that I have gathered over the course of working here, of course, and also some things that I've learned in design school that I believe take design from amateur to pro. These serve as reminders that also inadvertently I think sets standards for our email team, especially with one of the biggest seasons in e-com that is coming up. So my tip number one is utilizing grid systems. So grid systems is literally the first thing that they teach you in graphic design school for a very specific reason. And I think that sometimes the more design experience that you may have, you are also more likely to forget to do this because over time, your eye gets better. So you run the risk of getting what I like to call the eyeball trap. So you kind of eyeball things and you neglect using this, what I'm about to show you. Well, if you look at this example here, from first glance, it doesn't look chaotic at all, despite there are a lot going on. However, if you really broke it down, it's actually got a lot happening. And this picture of this man is split into 3 sections, seemingly without any rhyme or reason. The text is broken apart in random areas. The red squares are taking up a lot of space, have no purpose other than to frame the elements. So objectively speaking, this poster is pure chaos. However, the reason why it works is because there is in fact an underlying grid system that the designer obviously very mindfully utilized to place these elements within. So long story short, the grid not only helps the eye easily digest the information, but it also makes it intriguing to figure out what the poster is saying, despite, again, there being a lot going on. And so this can be easily applied to email as well, or any graphic design niche, because graphic design is reliant on layout. And grids act as a foundation to the layout. So grid systems, to summarize, help organize the text and images evenly. And anytime you've ever looked at a graphic design or graphic design in particular, and you thought, wow, that looks so clean, I would say 9 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10 times, it's because it follows an underlying grid system. So this is my number one tip to help you streamline your work and to make it look professional. And I urge everyone to go back to this basic because the most influential artists and designers know the rules well before they break them.
As far as the grid goes, is this something that is automatically like in your design platforms that you're using? Or is there are you trying to pull this from somewhere?
So you can set it up. Most design applications allow you to just set it up in how many rows and columns you want. But when you open a file, it's usually just bare bones clean. So it's up to the designer to see how many rows and columns they need before they start.
So how would you determine how many rows or columns you're going to use?
So it depends on, of course, the size of the canvas. So for email specifically, I use 700 by 14 to 2400 pixels. So usually in email, because it's longer, I would say nothing more than 3 columns would work. And however, the rows themselves, I think, just depend on how your design looks like. But I know for me, that's what works, because anything more than 3 columns would just make everything look too squished.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if there's a tactic or a method formula to figuring out what that is for you. So that was helpful.
Okay, so tip number 2 is to be aware of hierarchy and proximity. So this is something that seems intuitive, but I want to help you understand how truly important it is to be mindful of this. So this example looks like a landing page for a clothing website, and I really want to break down the reason why this works so well. Because we read from left to right, and the hero text is left flushed, meaning it's left aligned, it's the first thing that our eyes are drawn to. Of course, also taking note of the scale of the text in comparison to everything else. The second thing that we see, due to this proximity that I'm talking of, this element underneath of the hero text is the discount that's being offered. And this, because of the proximity of those elements, they tend to be read together, despite the fact that the 20% off call out is a lot smaller. And also because it's highlighted in orange, which also utilizes the 60-30-10 rule, which I'll go over later, it stands out despite it being so small. And this is a good reminder that everything that's around the biggest call out tends to be treated with equal importance. So pairing these two elements next to each other does a lot without doing too much. And that's a major skill that differentiates professional designers from amateurs or people that just don't really know what they're doing. And the next thing is this logo right here, which is highlighted also in the call to action color, which is orange in this case. And it's actually placed in a way that intentionally breaks the grid. As you can see, it's kind of floating about. It's not really aligned with anything. But this intentional placement actually makes the design more eye-catching and more disruptive, which is why it's intriguing to look at. And then immediately, once you process the most important information, which is Black Friday, 20% off everything, then you move on to the trust icons, which will then intrigue you to scroll through the rest of the site or the email, whatever this may pertain to, which is imperative because holding the attention of our customers is always the number one priority. Of course, I will also not fail to mention this beautiful picture, but despite this photo being captivating, it's low contrast, very minimal composition, black and white filter, gives this photo more of a background feel that sets the mood and the vibe of the layout rather than trying to snag your attention immediately. So this is a great example of using photography as a supportive element sometimes rather than immediately just eye-grabbing and attention-catching. So let's see what happens when the same design elements are placed on this canvas without much intention. While this design itself isn't necessarily bad in any way, and it still gets the same points across, it's visibly less captivating than the previous layout because it doesn't follow the same hierarchy and proximity rules. Not only is the text less interesting to read, but the information also seems to get kind of lost, and it makes the design look a lot less polished and professional. And this is a great example also of why you can't just solely rely on the underlying grid system alone, because this, I guess you could say, not so great example still follows the grid system and everything falls into alignment. But the reason why it doesn't work as well is because this hierarchy and proximity is not being prioritized in the same way. And so this is a good highlight to say that hierarchy and proximity is just as imperative to creating harmony and making your designs look truly bold and disruptive. So to summarize, hierarchy and proximity and intentional usage of it helps to communicate this information that you're trying to present in the right order, creates visual engagement, and makes a design a lot more memorable. And here I added some best email marketing practices by adding the code and the CTA, so you could see how those would fit in here without disturbing the layout of the design. And as an extra tip, if you are ever struggling with layout, write out the order in which you want the information to be read first as an outline, and then start designing from there. So that's my second tip. Does anyone have any questions before I move on?
I do.
Okay.
When you don't have a photo that like follows the things in your example that you shared, what is your go-to, or how are you guys like utilizing making that content better? There's like AI used a lot, but as far as like, I don't know, using the colors or changing the photos, how are you guys approaching that when you don't have the best content?
If there's no photo, what tends to kind of happen, I think, is I usually use a gradient in the background. The gradient just kind of helps the eye already like draw you downwards because you're interested to see the color. And maybe some sort of like flowing elements, like a background element, just something very minor to help draw attention to the text itself, but that's just something that I do. So I don't know if anyone else has any other suggestions or.
Well, what I would suggest is utilizing what what you mentioned with the 30-60-10 rule. When you don't have a photo, color or gradient, as you mentioned, can really help you out. And then I just wanted to mention, I really love this creative here because you're utilizing a lot of different elements. You're utilizing the power of three, right? With the 3 columns, you have a dichotomy of one side photo, one side text. And so you're right, we look from left to right. So photos are going to be the first thing that's going to catch our eyes. And the fact that the photo is very clean, is very descriptive, even though it's black and white, it matches with the text itself. So I find this creative very appealing. This is really good work, in my opinion.
I was gonna say that about the pictures. Like, what I would do first is go to like the more professional curated like sites to look for pictures. So, for example, Unsplash and Pexels, those are great. I know there are more, but those are like my first 2 options. And you can find like beautiful photography there, like you cannot miss. If I not find anything there, then I go to like the more stocky ones, like Canva and Envato. What I would do if I find like something that's too stocky, that looks like too staged or something like that, I would try to maybe remove the background and pair it like with another background image, like overlays, or maybe add a gradient to that background, or maybe even add a gradient map. So like a filter in Photoshop that transforms the colors within the image, and then it gives it like a duotone feel or 3-tone or like even a gradient. And then I try to fit that mood with the rest of the email. So I would say those are like my steps.
All right. So my tip number 3 is to use layering. So this is an email that I designed for Better Brand not too long ago. And again, nothing wrong with this. It gets the information across, does what it needs to do. However, this is what happens when you incorporate just some simple layering techniques. And so I want to break down exactly what I did here. So with these simple tweaks, you can create a lot more dynamic and interesting image without the use of many more elements, just simply due to the power of layers. To break it down, all I really did here was I enlarged the hero text and I split it into 2 lines to integrate typography into the layout itself. So instead of just the text just kind of floating over the image, it now looks like it's part of the image and part of the composition. I added a slight shadow under the hand and the arm to create just subtle depth. I slightly overlapped the image with the text itself just to create a little bit of visual interest, but obviously not to the point where it covers the text so you can't read it anymore. I also added an additional background element in one of the brand colors for more emphasis and movement. And I also believe I reduced the opacity so it's not directly competing with the arm or the CTA. And of course, I added a simple frame around the email itself for more increased focus. And that's something that I've been doing a lot recently. And I feel like just, enhancing the emails in a very simple way. So to summarize this tip, layering creates depth and visual interest. And it takes your designs from boring to captivating and catches the interest of our customers way, way faster. So this is tip number 3, kind of a short one, but I think still packs a really heavy punch. Does anyone have any comments or questions before I move on to the last tip?
If, let's say, a designer is looking at an email and they're like, okay, I feel like this is missing something, I need to add in some layers. Do you have any best tips for what exactly, how could someone figure out what they could add?
So I think layering works best when the image that's being used, like for this example, the image of the hand is cut out. So if it's a solid image that already has a background, it may work. It still will work, but you would have to perhaps reduce the size of the image. So there's a border around it, and then behind the image itself, you can incorporate some waves or other elements or a pattern. That's one way to incorporate layering, but I think it just looks cleaner and more modern when there isn't a background, like in this example right here.
I don't know if this was intentive, like if it was meant to do this, but with me looking at this, the yellow, it looks as if someone is saying the words. You can imagine someone is saying the brand. And so whenever I love creatives like this because it allows me to use my imagination when I'm looking at it, and the way the arms popping out looks 3D. And so when I look at that, I'm like, oh, someone is saying reignite your routine. And so I love the way the layering is set. So it looks as if someone is speaking to me. If I was to have this in my email, I'm definitely opening it up. Absolutely.
Wow, that's awesome feedback. Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. But yeah, I think maybe that is like the point of layering, is to make it look like it's speaking to you rather than like it looks like it's just one flat thing on a page. It's like popping out at you and it's like engaging you in like a story. But yeah, cool. That's really cool feedback. I guess I'll move on to tip number 4, which is the last one, also my favorite, and of course, best for last. But it's the 60-30-10 rule. It just makes such a huge difference in all design, all across the board, because it's unanimously used like literally all over the world. It's used in movies and film. It's used in interior design, architecture, in paintings, let alone UI, UX design. So this is something that truly sets a professional apart from the crowd because it's so incredibly intentional and it's so neglected, I think. But to break it down, 60% of the design needs to be the background or the base color. 30% needs to be the additional elements, primarily in the primary brand color or colors. I would say probably no more than 1 or 2. And 10% of the design needs to be the call to action color that indicates to the audience that they are now supposed to do something once they've processed the information that's presented to them. So it's a very exclusively used color just for that. So I want to show you an example of what happens when you neglect this rule. So obviously, this is a design that I made. Nothing wrong with the layout or the design itself. And although the percentages themselves, and this is a ballpark, this is just what I think it is, but although they don't deviate that far from the 60-30-10 split, these slight changes make the world of a difference in where your attention goes. So for one, the point of the email gets kind of lost because of how bright this yellow is, which makes you not want to look at it for too long. The CTAs get totally lost. Like you just don't even see them and they're not even interesting to even click on. The product photo itself, although it's a great photo, has a great composition, it just isn't framed well with the colors, and the colors themselves make this great photo look less captivating and washed out and completely just bland. The text is also very hard to skim because of the yellow, your eyes directly go to the word your consistency and you just like have no idea what's happening. And I think that's very crucial and something that you just want to avoid all the time, especially in email, because I think skimmability is probably one of the most important things in when you are reading an email. So let's look at what happens to the same design when you do utilize the 60-30-10 in a mindful way. Again, same email, same layout, same text, same photo, but the distribution of the colors make the design and the text a ton more interesting, which is literally the number one goal of all layout design, which includes email design. So yeah, to summarize, the 60-30-10 rule elevates the design's maturity just tenfold. It creates a seamless and more captivating scroll. It also makes the CTAs pop out and be more action inviting, which again, the 10% of that split only goes to the CTAs themselves. So anything that requires action. So like in apps, for example, really well-designed apps, anything that requires you to click on it is usually going to be in that CTA color. So anything that will open another page or anything that will just expand something, that will always be in the CTA color. And that is so applicable to like web design, to and email design especially. And this rule takes your designs from looking amateur to professional And in other words, from loud and distracting to bold and disruptive. So yeah, thank you so much for listening this morning, and may your journey to badness be successful.